July 1943. The rolling wheat fields outside Kursk burned under a merciless sun. German tank crews, hardened by 4 years of war, waited inside the steel hulls of Panthers and Tigers. Engines idled low, optics scanned the horizon. Through the shimmering heat haze, shapes appeared, low silhouettes, boxy turrets, narrow tracks kicking up dust. "Shermans," one German gunner muttered. The word carried no respect. To many German tank crews in 1943, the American M4 Sherman was not a serious threat. It was tall. It was lightly armored compared to a Tiger. Its main gun, the standard 75mm, lacked the raw penetrating power of the German long-barreled 75mm and 88mm guns. Its gasoline engine was known to ignite when hit, earning it grim nicknames among Allied crews and Axis propagandists alike. The Germans had built machines designed for battlefield intimidation. The Tiger I weighed over 50 tons, its thick frontal armor capable of shrugging off many early war Allied guns. The Panther, introduced in 1943, carried a high-velocity 75mm cannon that could destroy most Allied tanks at long range. Against such machines, the Sherman looked modest. It weighed roughly 30 tons. Its armor was sloped but thinner. Its profile was taller, making it easier to spot. And on paper, it seemed outclassed in direct, long-range duels. German tank commanders took note. Reports from the Eastern Front in 1943 described the Sherman as mechanically reliable, but tactically inferior in one-on-one engagements. Its guns struggled against the thick frontal armor of Panthers and Tigers at extended distances. Crews were advised to aim for weaker side armor or attempt flanking maneuvers. To German eyes trained to value armor thickness and gun size, the Sherman seemed like a compromise machine, built quickly, perhaps carelessly, in vast American factories. But that assumption misunderstood its purpose. The Sherman was never designed to dominate through sheer armor or gunpowder alone. It was designed within a different philosophy, one rooted in mobility, reliability, standardization, and production scale. When American industry committed to war, it did so with staggering speed. The United States did not need to match Germany tank for tank in complexity. It needed to outproduce, outmove, and outlast. The M4 Sherman emerged from that industrial mindset. Its design emphasized mechanical simplicity. Components were standardized across variants. Engines varied. Radial aircraft engines, Ford V8s, diesel units. But the chassis and core systems remained consistent enough to simplify maintenance and training. A Sherman could be repaired quickly in field workshops. Spare parts were interchangeable. Damaged units were often recovered and returned to service faster than their heavier German counterparts. And that reliability mattered more than early critics realized. On the battlefield, a tank that starts every morning and drives 100 miles without catastrophic breakdown is often more valuable than one that boasts thicker armor but suffers mechanical failure after extended maneuver. German Panther units in 1943 learned this harsh lesson. Many Panthers deployed during Operation Citadel at Kursk broke down before even reaching engagement lines. Final drive failures, engine fires, transmission issues, the advanced machines were powerful but temperamental. The Sherman, by contrast, kept moving. Still, in 1943, mockery persisted. German crews reported that Shermans often brewed up when penetrated, ammunition stored in side sponsons igniting dramatically. Flames bursting from hatches reinforced the narrative of vulnerability. Propaganda units circulated images of burning Allied tanks as evidence of German technical superiority. But statistics told a more complicated story. Shermans were present in growing numbers, not only in Soviet Lend-Lease formations, but increasingly in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. American and British armor divisions were standardizing around the M4 platform. Production lines were running at full capacity. By the end of the war, over 49,000 Shermans would be built. Germany would never approach that number with any single tank type. The Sherman's height, often criticized, gave it internal advantages, more room for crew coordination, better ergonomics, faster loading cycles. Its turret traverse, powered hydraulically, was faster than many German designs. In close engagements, this could mean the difference between firing first or not at all. American armor doctrine also differed fundamentally, where German tank warfare emphasized concentrated spearheads led by heavy armor. U.S. doctrine integrated tanks closely with infantry, artillery, and air support. Shermans rarely fought alone. They advanced under umbrella coverage from artillery barrages and increasingly from fighter bombers like the P-47 Thunderbolt. The battlefield was becoming interconnected. Yet in 1943, at Kursk and across Europe, the German tank crews still believed in their qualitative edge. The Tiger's 88mm gun could destroy a Sherman at distances where return fire was ineffective. Panthers, when functioning properly, dominated open terrain engagements. But war is not decided by isolated duels. It is decided by systems. And the system behind the Sherman was only beginning to show its strength. For every Tiger deployed, multiple Shermans rolled off assembly lines. For every complex repair required on a damaged Panther, American mechanics replaced parts in hours. Crews trained in large numbers. Replacement tanks arrived by ship across the Atlantic in steady convoys. The Germans saw the Sherman as a lesser machine. What they did not yet see was that it was part of something larger, something that did not aim to win by being individually superior, but by being everywhere, every day, in numbers that never seemed to diminish. In 1943, they laughed at the Sherman. They compared armor thickness. They measured gun calibers. They judged silhouette height. They believed they understood it. They did not yet understand what it represented. The transformation did not begin with a single battle. It began with repetition. Italy, late 1943. Rain turned roads into mud. Narrow mountain passes forced armor into tight columns. German forces, entrenched along defensive lines, relied heavily on anti-tank guns and carefully positioned Panthers to halt Allied advances. Shermans kept arriving. They did not always win dramatic long-range duels. They were knocked out. They burned. Crews bailed out under fire. But what unnerved German observers was what happened next. More Shermans followed. American armored divisions rarely committed single vehicles into isolation. They advanced in coordinated units, supported by infantry, engineers, artillery observers, and increasingly by tactical air power. When one tank was disabled, another took its position. When a road was blocked, engineers cleared it. When German anti-tank guns revealed their position, artillery suppressed them. The Sherman was not designed to be invincible. It was designed to be replaceable. And that distinction mattered more with each passing month. Mechanically, the Sherman proved astonishingly dependable compared to many of its adversaries. Its suspension system, whether the earlier vertical volute spring suspension or later improved variants, allowed consistent mobility across uneven terrain. Its engines, though varied across production models, were generally robust and easier to service in the field than the complex power plants of Panthers and Tigers. German maintenance crews faced increasing difficulty by 1944. Spare parts became scarce. Fuel shortages grew severe. Damaged heavy tanks often had to be abandoned if recovery vehicles were unavailable. A Tiger immobilized by transmission failure was not merely a temporary loss, it was often gone permanently. The Sherman's lighter weight allowed easier recovery. Allied forces possessed large numbers of recovery vehicles capable of towing disabled tanks. Many Shermans knocked out by non-catastrophic damage were repaired and returned to action within days. In contrast, a disabled Panther stranded in contested territory was frequently destroyed by its own crew to prevent capture. This disparity compounded over time. American industry did not pause for reflection. It accelerated. Factories in Detroit, Lima, and other industrial centers ran around the clock. Workers, many of whom had never touched military equipment before the war, assembled tanks with disciplined efficiency. Standardization simplified training. Crews could transfer between units and operate similar systems. Replacement tanks required minimal retraining. The German system, by contrast, became increasingly fragmented. New models, modifications, field adjustments, each improved performance in theory but complicated logistics. The Panther was powerful, but it required careful maintenance. The Tiger was formidable, but its heavy weight strained bridges and fuel supplies. By 1944, the strategic environment amplified these differences. When Allied forces landed in Normandy in June, Shermans rolled ashore in significant numbers. The hedgerow country of northern France created a unique battlefield. Visibility was limited. Engagement ranges shortened. Maneuver was constrained by thick earth embankments and narrow lanes. In this terrain, raw long-range gunpower was less decisive. Close engagements favored quick turret traverse, crew coordination, and combined arms integration. Shermans operated in cooperation with infantry squads equipped with anti-tank weapons. Engineers blasted openings in hedgerows. Artillery blanketed suspected German positions. When Panthers ambushed from concealed positions, they could inflict severe losses. But they were rarely facing isolated targets. Allied artillery observers quickly marked firing points. Fighter bombers were summoned. German armored units found themselves pinned, harassed, and gradually worn down. The battlefield had become layered. A Panther might destroy 2 or 3 Shermans from a concealed position, but then be located and targeted by artillery or air attack. Even if tactically successful in a brief engagement, it was strategically vulnerable. Sherman crews adapted as well. They learned to flank rather than engage frontally when possible. They coordinated movements in pairs or platoons. They used smoke rounds to obscure vision. Tank destroyer units, equipped with higher velocity guns, were integrated into formations to counter heavy German armor. Most importantly, American armored commanders understood the importance of tempo. Shermans moved continuously. They advanced rapidly when breakthroughs occurred. Their operational range, supported by abundant fuel and maintenance infrastructure, allowed sustained offensives. After the breakout from Normandy in late July 1944, Allied armored columns surged across France at remarkable speed. German formations, already strained, struggled to regroup. Panthers and Tigers that might have been decisive in static defense found themselves forced into rapid withdrawals, often without adequate fuel or spare parts. Shermans kept coming, and they did not come alone. Above them flew thunderbolts and typhoons. Behind them rolled supply convoys delivering ammunition and replacement parts. Engineers built bridges strong enough for 30-ton tanks more quickly than those capable of supporting 50-ton monsters. The German assumption that technical superiority would compensate for numerical inferiority began to erode. Individual engagement still favored heavy German armor under ideal conditions. A Tiger positioned hull down on open ground could dominate. A Panther firing first from concealment was deadly. But ideal conditions grew rarer. The Sherman's reliability translated into operational persistence. It started in the morning, it reached the battlefield, it maneuvered, it was repaired, it returned. German tankers increasingly faced not a single duel, but a cycle. Engage, withdraw, repair, face new Shermans tomorrow. Reports from late 1944 began noting the constant presence of American armor. Even when German units achieved local tactical success, the broader front continued to compress. Fuel depots were bombed, rail networks were disrupted, reinforcements were delayed or destroyed en route. The Sherman's gun was gradually improved as well. The introduction of the 76mm gun variant increased penetration capability against German armor at medium ranges. British Firefly variants, mounting the powerful 17-pounder gun, posed serious threats even to Tigers. The narrative of helpless inferiority became less sustainable. Sherman crews still feared Panthers and Tigers. They respected their firepower. But they no longer approached every encounter as predetermined defeat. They had numbers. They had coordination. They had support. And they had something the German tank crews increasingly lacked: strategic momentum. The Sherman was not glamorous. It did not inspire awe through sheer size. It inspired something more subtle: inevitability. The Germans had mocked it as a compromise machine. They were beginning to realize it was part of a system designed not to dominate individual duels, but to win the war of endurance. And endurance was now deciding the battlefield. By the autumn of 1944, the question was no longer whether the Sherman could defeat a Tiger in a straight duel. The question had shifted to something far more consequential. How long could Germany withstand an army built around machines that never stopped moving? After the breakout from Normandy, Allied armored divisions advanced across France with astonishing speed. Entire German defensive lines collapsed, not because every Panther was destroyed in combat, but because the pace of Allied movement overwhelmed command structures, logistics, and recovery capacity. Shermans led that advance. Columns of olive-drab tanks rolled through towns liberated only hours earlier. Civilians watched from doorways as American armored crews moved forward without pause. Maintenance crews worked behind the lines, repairing track damage, replacing engines, rearming tanks for the next push east. Operational tempo became the Sherman's true weapon. German commanders had designed their armored doctrine around decisive counterblows, concentrated armored thrusts that shattered advancing forces. But those counterblows required coordination, fuel, and time. Time was disappearing. Shermans crossed rivers on hastily constructed pontoon bridges. They pushed through forest roads and across open farmland. Their mechanical reliability allowed them to cover long distances without catastrophic breakdown. When mechanical issues did arise, parts were available. Recovery vehicles were available. Replacement tanks were available. In contrast, German heavy tanks increasingly suffered from a silent enemy: logistics. The Tiger and Panther were powerful but thirsty. Their engines consumed fuel at rates Germany could no longer comfortably sustain. Synthetic fuel plants had been bombed repeatedly. Rail lines were disrupted. Fuel shortages limited training hours for new crews and restricted operational deployments. In the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, Germany launched one final major offensive in the West. Panthers and Tigers once again spearheaded the attack, hoping to fracture Allied lines and seize vital supply hubs. Shermans met them in snow and fog. At first, German armor achieved local surprise. In narrow forest roads and frozen terrain, heavy tanks could dominate small engagements. Shermans were destroyed, crews were lost. The threat was real. But the broader pattern reasserted itself. American units regrouped quickly. Artillery concentrations intensified. Air superiority, once weather cleared, returned decisively. Thunderbolts and other fighter bombers struck German supply columns and stalled armored thrusts. Shermans maneuvered in coordinated groups, flanking where possible, holding defensive lines until reinforcements arrived. The Bulge revealed something important. The Sherman did not need to be individually superior to survive the war's most desperate counteroffensive. It needed to be present in sufficient numbers, supported by integrated forces, and sustained logistically. It was. As 1945 began, Allied armies crossed into Germany itself. Urban combat, river crossings, and collapsing infrastructure created chaotic battlefields. Panthers still lurked in defensive ambush positions. Jagdtigers and other heavy vehicles appeared in limited numbers. But they were isolated expressions of technical ambition, not pillars of a stable system. Shermans advanced street by street when required, supported by infantry and engineers. In open terrain, they maneuvered in platoons, using smoke, artillery spotting, and coordinated fire to neutralize German armor. Tank destroyers and Fireflies supplemented their firepower when heavier opposition appeared. The German crews who once mocked the Sherman increasingly encountered it under very different circumstances. Instead of facing a handful of unfamiliar vehicles, they now faced entire armored divisions built around the M4 platform. Instead of choosing when and where to engage, they were reacting to constant pressure. Instead of relying on carefully prepared defensive lines, they were withdrawing repeatedly under threat of encirclement. Even when Panthers achieved tactical success, knocking out multiple Shermans in a single engagement, they often faced overwhelming follow-up. Artillery barrages bracketed their positions. Infantry anti-tank teams closed in. Airstrikes were called. The battlefield was no longer a duel between two machines. It was a contest between systems. And the system supporting the Sherman was relentless. American armored crews also matured tactically. By 1945, many units were composed of veterans who had survived months of combat. They understood the strengths and limitations of their tanks intimately. They knew when to advance aggressively and when to wait for support. They learned to exploit terrain, to mask movement, to coordinate crossfires. Experience reduced losses. Modifications improved survivability as well. Ammunition storage was redesigned in later variants to reduce catastrophic fires, introducing wet stowage systems that surrounded ammunition with liquid to decrease ignition risk. Though not eliminating vulnerability, it significantly reduced the frequency of explosive brew-ups. The Sherman evolved. It was not static. German heavy tanks also evolved, but their improvements came at increasing cost, more complexity, more strain on industry, more dependence on resources that were dwindling. By spring 1945, the image of the Sherman had shifted dramatically in German field reports. No longer dismissed casually, it was recognized as the standard bearer of Allied armored strength. It was not feared for a single attribute, but for its omnipresence. Where one was destroyed, another appeared. Where a road was blocked, another route was found. Where a defensive position was established, artillery and air power soon followed. Sherman crews did not consider themselves invincible. They knew the dangers. They had seen Panthers punch through armor at long range. They had watched comrades' tanks burn. But they also knew something else, that they were rarely alone, rarely unsupported, rarely abandoned. That confidence shaped behavior. German crews, by contrast, increasingly operated under uncertainty. Would fuel last? Would recovery vehicles arrive? Would reinforcements come? Would Allied aircraft appear overhead? In 1943, the Sherman had been a curiosity, a lesser machine measured against heavier German armor. By early 1945, it had become the backbone of an advancing force that no longer needed to prove itself in isolated duels. It simply needed to keep moving, and it did. By May 1945, the argument was over. Not in design rooms, not in armchair debates about armor thickness or gun caliber. On the battlefield, where outcomes mattered more than specifications, the Sherman had proven something fundamental. It had not been the most powerful tank of the war, it had been the most sustainable. When American and Allied forces stood on the Elbe River and in the ruins of Berlin's outskirts, Shermans were there. Not because they had dominated every engagement, not because they had outmatched every Panther in raw firepower, but because they had endured the entire campaign. War is not a contest of isolated moments. It is a test of systems under strain. The Sherman's strength lay in how seamlessly it fit into the Allied system. It could be mass-produced without crippling industry. It could be transported across oceans in large numbers. It could be assembled, repaired, and upgraded with relative efficiency. Crews could be trained quickly and transferred between units without relearning entirely new machinery. Logistics officers could calculate fuel and ammunition consumption with predictability. Predictability is power in modern war. German heavy tanks inspired fear and deserved respect. A Tiger commanding a defensive position could halt an advance temporarily. A Panther in a concealed ambush could devastate an exposed column. But those moments were fragments. The larger pattern favored the side that could replace losses faster than they occurred, repair damage efficiently, and maintain operational tempo across entire fronts. The Sherman embodied that pattern. American production lines had delivered nearly 50,000 units. Even accounting for losses, the sheer scale altered strategic mathematics. German armored production, fragmented across multiple designs, never matched that consistency. Panthers, Tigers, and other variants were produced in far smaller quantities and demanded greater industrial complexity. Moreover, the Sherman's adaptability extended beyond combat roles. Variants carried mine flails, bulldozer blades, flamethrowers, bridging equipment. It became not just a tank, but a chassis for solving battlefield problems. Engineers relied on it. Infantry trusted its support. Commanders planned operations knowing it would be available. Its silhouette, once mocked for its height, became familiar across liberated Europe. And perception shifted. German crews no longer laughed at Shermans by 1945. They calculated how many they faced. They assessed whether they had fuel for maneuver. They wondered whether air cover would appear above them before long. The fear was not of a single Sherman. It was of what followed it. Allied armored doctrine matured around cooperation. Tanks, infantry, artillery, and aircraft operated as interlocking components. The Sherman did not need to be the strongest element in isolation. It needed to function reliably within that network. And it did. In contrast, German armored units increasingly fought isolated battles. Fuel shortages forced limited deployments. Replacement crews lacked sufficient training. Recovery assets were scarce. When heavy tanks were lost, they were often irreplaceable within meaningful timeframes. The psychological effect compounded. German tankers understood that even if they destroyed several Shermans in a successful engagement, the broader advance might continue elsewhere. They were defending shrinking territory against expanding momentum. Meanwhile, Sherman crews knew reinforcements were coming. They knew supply lines were intact. They knew the system behind them was vast. Confidence and doubt are invisible forces, but they shape decisions under fire. The Sherman's critics after the war often focused on its vulnerabilities. They pointed to the thinner armor compared to Tigers. They cited early ammunition storage flaws. They replayed dramatic footage of burning vehicles. Those criticisms are not entirely wrong. The Sherman was not invulnerable. But vulnerability alone does not determine victory. Sustainability does. The tank's later improvements, including better armor configurations and safer ammunition storage, reduced some of its early weaknesses. Its 76mm gun variants improved anti-armor performance. Allied tactical adjustments compensated for what raw specifications could not, and by the time Germany collapsed, the Sherman had accomplished its strategic purpose. It had carried Allied forces from the beaches of Normandy through France, Belgium, and into the heart of Germany. It had supported infantry in urban fighting. It had crossed rivers and endured harsh winter campaigns. It had absorbed losses and returned in greater numbers. It had outlasted its critics. In 1943, German crews looked across fields at tall silhouettes and saw an inferior machine. By 1945, when they saw that same silhouette approaching through smoke and dust, they no longer measured armor thickness first. They measured distance to withdrawal routes, they calculated artillery response times, they listened for aircraft overhead. The Sherman had not become a mythical beast like the Tiger, it had become something more consequential, the dependable engine of a vast war machine. Its legacy is not one of intimidation through size or singular duels won at extreme range. Its legacy is one of relentless presence. It proved that in industrial war, the weapon that wins is often the one that can be built, repaired, transported, and fielded in overwhelming numbers without collapsing the system that supports it. The Germans mocked it because they judged it by the wrong standard. They judged it as a duelist. It was never meant to be one. It was built to endure a global war of logistics, production, and sustained pressure. And in that war, the Sherman did exactly what it was designed to do. They laughed at the Sherman. Then they faced it, again and again, until there was nowhere left to retreat.